My ex, the fake influencer, publicly humiliated me at our anniversary dinner, dumping me because I only earned $35,000 and suggesting I become her friend with benefits. I disappeared, cut contact, and started dating her sister, the wildlife vet. But the debt wasn't fully paid until my ex tried to crash my wedding and faced the most humiliating public takedown in front of her entire family. I'm Adam, 29, and I work as a survival instructor and environmental educator in the mountains of Colorado. I don't earn Silicon Valley money, nor do I have a fancy office, but I make a living doing something I truly enjoy, teaching people how to manage far from technological comfort. Between my base salary and the private courses I teach on weekends, I earn about $62,000 a year. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live well. My job isn't the typical professor gig. I run a state survival program for schools, groups, scouts, and recreational centers. During spring and summer, I'm teaching kids how to build improvised shelters, purify water, or recognize poisonous plants. In fall and winter, I lead intensive courses for adults, city people learning to build fires, track animals, or camp in low temperatures. The private sessions are what really boost my income. I charge $800 per person for an intensive weekend with groups of 6 to 8 participants. During peak season, I do 2 or 3 sessions a month, which adds between $9,600 and $14,400 on top of my base salary of $48,000. This detail will be important later. 5 years ago, I bought a cabin for $10,000, taking advantage of a market downturn. 1 bedroom, yes, but with 20 acres of forest, its own stream, and enough wildlife to teach classes without leaving the property. The previous owner, a retired park ranger, had maintained trails and built observation decks. It was perfect for my lifestyle. The cabin was far from ideal. Leaky roofs, faulty plumbing, and an electrical system incapable of supporting any modern appliance. I spent 2 years fixing it myself using tutorials, calls to my dad, and a lot of patience. Today, the house is solid, efficient, and entirely mine. No mortgage, just taxes and utilities that run around $400 a month. For me, that is the definition of freedom. During that time, I was with Veronica, 27. We had been together for 3 years. She marketed herself as some kind of authentic mountain girl with thousands of followers on social media. Her Instagram was a gallery of rustic cabins, boots on rocks, sunrises in solitary places, and deep phrases about finding peace in nature. The reality was different. She loved expensive restaurants in Denver. She avoided getting her hands dirty, and her adventure photos were taken just a few yards from the parking lot after making me walk to find the perfect angle. She spent hours adjusting the light, changing clothes, and editing images to simulate an entire day in the woods, when in reality we didn't even cover a quarter mile. Her lifestyle was pure luxury, extremely expensive sportswear she never used for sports, hiking boots without a speck of dirt, and a white Range Rover that she insisted on leasing because it looked better in photos. She earned between $4,000 and $6,000 monthly from sponsored posts, but spent as if she earned double. Her credit cards were maxed out, and she assumed that since I was the stable one, I should cover more expenses. I met her at an outdoor gear fair. I was giving a demonstration on wilderness first aid, and she approached me, showing interest with intelligent questions and an apparent enthusiasm for conservation. At first, I thought we shared values. Today, I know she was just looking for content. The first few months were good. She seemed interested in my work, in my stories about kids learning to track in the snow, and in my cabin. But 6 months later, problems began to surface. She complained that my courses occupied the weekends, preventing her from going to brunch with her influencer friends. She suggested I switch my truck for one that looked good on her networks. She even proposed installing a jacuzzi in the cabin because every mountain property should have one for photos. Still, she had moments where she seemed genuinely committed. She would cook in the cabin, help me edit photos for my professional page. We talked about collaborating on projects, blending her audience with my knowledge. These moments made me believe that over time, she would stop treating everything like a production and start living real life with me. By the second year, I let many things slide. 3 maxed out credit cards, weekends where she disappeared for conferences, and expensive dinners where she posed as if she had paid, then passed the bill to me. I thought we were building something serious. As our third anniversary approached, I made more effort than ever. Veronica had been hinting for months that she expected something special and memorable for the date, which translated into content for her networks and an occasion to brag to friends whose boyfriends were tech executives or finance guys. So I planned a weekend I thought would be perfect. A romantic cabin, not mine, but a rustic property 2 hours further into the mountains. I had planned that weekend with obsessive dedication. I wanted our celebration to be perfect, something special that truly showed how much I cared about her. On Friday, we settled into a rented cabin in an authentic, natural setting. No cell signal, completely isolated from city noise. It was exactly the kind of experience Veronica claimed to love: clean air, real silence, and paths that seemed untouched for decades. The idea was to disconnect from everything and enjoy something genuine. But as soon as we arrived, I noticed she seemed more interested in setting up scenes for her social media photos than in spending time with me. She had brought several changes of clothes, portable lights, power banks, and an absurd number of accessories. She spent hours changing, fixing her hair, checking the lighting, looking for angles, and posing in front of the fireplace or the window, as if we were staging a fashion shoot. Even when I showed her wildflowers or corners of the forest that I thought she would love, she barely looked at them for a few seconds before returning to plan another shot. I told myself repeatedly that this was her job, that producing visual content was part of her professional life. I tried to understand. Although every moment I saw her more focused on her phone than on me raised a concern that I preferred to ignore. Still, I thought the real highlight of the weekend would be the Saturday dinner. I had been organizing it for months. I had managed to secure a reservation at Meridian, one of the most sought-after restaurants in Denver. They didn't accept online reservations, only by phone, and only during a specific morning window. I called exactly at 10 a.m. 2 months prior. I waited nearly 15 minutes on hold and finally managed to secure a table for 4. I wanted Veronica to feel accompanied by people she considered important to her image, so I invited Skylar and Chloe, 2 friends of hers who also moved in the social media world. The dinner was going to cost me a significant amount, about $600, counting my part and that of Veronica's friends. I had set aside money from my private courses for months to make it happen. It wasn't just an anniversary. It was my way of showing her that I could offer her the kind of life she claimed to desire without abandoning the job I loved. On Saturday, I picked her up at her Denver apartment at 5 p.m. It took me 20 minutes to find a parking spot. Before going in, Veronica checked her makeup several times in the car mirror, adjusting small details as if she were about to walk a red carpet. When we sat down at the table, Skylar and Chloe were already there, impeccably dressed, talking about sponsorships, trips, and followers, as if it were the only conversation in the world. It wasn't the first time I'd seen them. Every previous encounter had made it clear that they considered me simply the boyfriend who didn't fit into their circle, the guy who didn't earn astronomical figures, who didn't seek fame, and who didn't live obsessed with his digital image. Still, I tried to maintain a cordial attitude. From the first minute, I understood that something was out of place. Veronica didn't look at me. She didn't talk to me. She was engrossed in her phone, sending messages nonstop and only reacting to what her friends said. She didn't even seem to notice that I was there to celebrate an anniversary. When the menus without prices arrived, a classic in places where even breathing is expensive, the waitress began telling us the nightly specials with that rehearsed intonation that made everything sound even more costly. Then Skylar made her grand entrance. "So, Adam," she said, drawing out a tone disguised as interest, "are you still doing that outdoor teaching thing?" I fell into the trap, believing she genuinely wanted to know. I explained that I worked teaching survival techniques, that I helped people of all ages connect with essential skills, that I had taught a course to a group of executives who initially didn't take it seriously, but ended up fascinated by learning to build improvised shelters and purify water. I spoke with enthusiasm because I truly enjoy it, but when I looked at Veronica, the expression I found was devastating. She was watching me as if I were publicly embarrassing her. "Seriously, you're going to talk about that here?" she interrupted with a nervous, clearly forced laugh. "You seem stuck in the past, Adam. Look around you. Skylar's boyfriend just secured an investment round for his third startup. Chloe's is a banker and bought an apartment in Aspen. And you want to talk about building campfires?" The table fell silent. The waitress who was about to approach stopped, took a step back, and discreetly moved away. I could feel other diners turning to look at us. I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "I'm talking about something that matters. Real education, life-saving skills, preserving nature, meaningful things." Veronica let out a smile full of that venom that only appears when someone wants to humiliate another without remorse. "Meaningful things don't pay the bills, Adam. I've been patient. I thought someday you'd want to aim for something bigger, but you're still stuck in the dirt, earning $35,000 while everyone else is building real wealth." The figure wasn't even correct. I had told her many times that between my salary and the additional courses, I earned more than double that. Plus, I lived debt-free on a fully paid-for property, but none of that mattered. She wasn't talking to me. She was performing for her select audience. I took another breath. "It seems we're looking for different things." "Totally," she replied, leaning back in her chair with an icy smile. "That's why we should just stay friends with benefits. You give me company when I need it, and I can find someone with more ambition to build a suitable public image." Friends with benefits. After 3 years, at our anniversary dinner, in a restaurant I had saved for months to afford, and in front of her friends who were now avoiding eye contact. Even Skylar looked uncomfortable, which was saying a lot. Chloe didn't let go of the bread, as if the basket were suddenly the most interesting object on the table. I pulled out $200 and deliberately placed them on the table. "Your things will be ready at the cabin. You can come for them whenever you want." I stood up in silence. "Don't exaggerate, Adam," Veronica exclaimed, raising her voice enough for several tables to turn. "That's why you don't get ahead. You don't know how to have adult conversations about real expectations." I didn't answer. I walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind me, I heard murmurs. Did she really say that? How cruel. Poor guy. And that's how the dinner I had been preparing for months ended. The 2-hour drive back to the cabin became an endless journey where not a single word was spoken. The silence inside the car had a weight of its own, almost as if it occupied the passenger seat and breathed with me. Every curve in the road seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if the world wanted to force me to confront what had just happened. The cold air that slipped through the window crack barely managed to diminish the sense of pressure in my chest. I experienced a complicated mix. On one hand, a deep, legitimate rage that boiled inside me every time I recalled Veronica's condescending tone. On the other, an embarrassment that made me clench my teeth as I replayed her words. But beneath it all, something unexpected emerged. Relief. A strange, almost disconcerting relief that ran through me like a warm current. It was as if I had carried an enormous burden for too long and, without even asking, someone had allowed me to drop it instantly. On that drive, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see until then. That relationship had worn me down more than I realized. The anger I felt was superficial compared to the clarity that began to settle within me. That clarity was sharp, like a newly honed blade. Suddenly, everything clicked. I had seen Veronica without filters, without her brand personality, without that image carefully constructed for social media. What I saw was much more real than she had ever posted. Her ego, her coldness, her way of measuring people's worth based on the utility she found in them. When I finally parked in front of the cabin, my phone was vibrating incessantly on the passenger seat. I hadn't even touched it while driving. But notifications were accumulating as if the device was vomiting desperation. Messages flooded the screen. "Adam, I didn't mean to say it that way. You're making a big deal out of something small. Let's talk like adults. You're not going to throw away 3 years over one comment. Stop acting like a victim. I was just being honest. Each text had that characteristic mix of minimization and manipulation. By midnight, I had 17 missed calls and 43 messages that varied between weak apologies, veiled accusations, and dramatizations where she magically became the aggrieved party. I read them all meticulously, not because I doubted what I was going to do, but because I wanted to understand every angle of that manipulation. It was almost an analytical exercise, like evaluating reports for my job, seeing the words, identifying patterns, recognizing intentions. When I finished, the decision was made. I blocked her. I didn't want another speech or another attempt to guilt-trip me. I surgically erased her digital presence, number, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, everything. No explanations, no goodbyes, just silence. A silence that, for the first time in years, didn't hurt me. The next morning, I woke up with a different, calm, and firm determination. I started packing her things. Veronica had filled almost 40% of my space with her belongings over the years. Designer clothes that cost more than my quarterly taxes, facial care products that needed refrigeration, makeup stored in special cases with integrated lights, tripods, and ring lights everywhere. The amount of money spent on things that essentially had no practical utility in our daily lives was stunning. Every box I closed increased my sense of freedom. It was like cleaning not only a physical space, but the emotional atmosphere she had contaminated with demands, derogatory comments, and that superficial vision of life I never shared. Just as I was sealing the last box, I heard an engine outside. I peered out, thinking it would be her white Range Rover, with her ready to claim her right to talk to me. But it wasn't. It was a silver Subaru. I instantly recognized Bethany, her older sister. We had met perhaps 4 or 5 times at family gatherings, always formally and superficially. She worked at a veterinary hospital specializing in wildlife. She was wearing her uniform, and her expression said more than any words. She looked embarrassed, but not because of anything she had done, but because of the blood they shared. I opened the door before she could knock. "Adam," she said immediately, "I am so sorry about all of this. Veronica asked me to come get her things. She said you'd had an argument, but last night Skylar called me and told me what really happened. I have no words. It was cruel. No one deserves to hear something like that." Her tone wasn't the typical complacent one that Veronica's family used to smooth over her behavior. She wasn't trying to justify her. It was sincere, almost with an air of resignation. It was clear she had been dealing with her sister's ways for years. What happened next wasn't in my plans. Bethany didn't just take the boxes and leave. She took a few steps inside the cabin, looking around with real curiosity. She observed my wildlife photographs hanging on the walls, hawks in flight, deer crossing streams, mountain lions caught by trail cameras. She examined the topographical maps full of annotations, the wooden utensils I had carved myself during the winters. "I always wanted to see what this place was really like," she murmured. Veronica would post photos, but she only showed the aesthetic corners. "This," she scanned the room, "is completely different. It has life." I couldn't help but laugh softly. She only photographed what served her profile. The authentic stuff didn't generate enough likes. Bethany started helping me load the boxes. Unlike Veronica, she didn't fill the air with empty words or move as if a camera were recording her. She had that practical efficiency of someone used to solving real problems. She asked me where to place things, followed my directions, didn't seek compliments, didn't act. And while we worked, she began to ask me about my job, but with genuine interest. They weren't polite phrases. It was authentic curiosity. She asked me about conservation programs, the species we rehabilitated, the difficulties of teaching respect for nature in an age where everything goes through a screen. "Your work has enormous value," she commented when we stored the last box in her car. "Not for social media, but for the real world. That's what people forget." I observed her closely. She was older than Veronica, perhaps in her late 30s. There was a quiet intelligence in her gaze and a silent weariness that I immediately understood. Years of watching her sister live in a superficial, exhausting world. She didn't need to explain it. I read it in her expression. "You never said you were interested in conservation," I commented. "Veronica doesn't listen to anything she can't turn into content," she replied with a dry laugh. "I studied environmental science before switching to veterinary medicine. I've always loved this work, but it doesn't fit the look she wants to project." We stood there under the light filtered by the pines, talking with surprising ease. She was someone who understood the real value of my work without the need for filters or decorations. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" I asked, almost without thinking. "Talk about real conservation, not the influencer version." She smiled, a real, unposed smile. Yes, I would. What started as a coffee at a small diner turned into seeing each other once or twice a week. We talked about injured species, orphaned foxes, raptors rehabilitated after accidents. She shared tough but purposeful stories, and I did the same. Little by little, without seeking it, my life recovered something it had lost a long time ago: tranquility. Bethany's knowledge of animal behavior and emergency medical procedures always surprised me. She talked about everything with a direct, practical clarity, very similar to the way I approached my survival classes. Over time, that small restaurant halfway between her hospital and my cabin ended up becoming our usual meeting point. It wasn't a fancy place. Vinyl booths, strong coffee, simple food, and all-day breakfast, but it was comfortable, authentic, and perfect for the conversations we had. She would tell me about a 3-legged coyote she was rehabilitating after it fell into an illegal trap, and I would share experiences teaching city kids to recognize poisonous plants or navigate without technology. Seeing the exact moment they understood that nature wasn't an enemy, but something they could understand, was always special. They were real talks, unadorned and unposed, where neither tried to impress the other. Just two people connecting over what they truly valued. Around the 6th week after meeting her, Bethany said something that changed the tone of our conversations. "Veronica has been asking about you," she commented cautiously while stirring her coffee. "She wants to know if you've contacted me, if I've seen you, if you're dating someone. She's convinced you'll come back when you get over what she calls your overreaction." I genuinely laughed for the first time in weeks. "So now she frames it that way, huh?" I replied. "That I overreacted?" "Sure, according to her. I was the spoiled child who couldn't handle talking about our future and ran out of the restaurant without giving her an explanation." Bethany's face remained neutral, as if she didn't want to influence my reaction. "Just so you know, Skylar already told the whole family what really happened," she added. "Veronica's version isn't having the impact she hoped for." It was nice to hear that, although, to be honest, Veronica's narrative no longer mattered to me. I was much more interested in the woman sitting across from me, someone who didn't have to invent anything to feel valuable. 2 months after meeting, Bethany mentioned that her family was organizing their traditional summer barbecue, a large event at her parents' house with cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and the whole repertoire. She brought it up during lunch. "My family has a huge reunion every July," she said, "and Veronica will be there. I'd like you to come with me, but I'll understand if you prefer to avoid the atmosphere. I don't want to create drama." I didn't need to think about it much. "I'm going," I replied. "I'm not doing anything wrong, and I'm not going to hide from anyone." "Are you sure?" she asked. "It could be uncomfortable." "Bethany," I answered. "She publicly humiliated me after 3 years together, then tried to downgrade me to a friends with benefits arrangement. I'm not going to continue being the one who is uncomfortable to protect her feelings. If she has a problem with me being there, she can deal with it." The smile she gave me was subtle but sincere. "Then be prepared. My mom is going to adore you." The family reunion was the following Saturday. Bethany's parents lived in a pleasant Denver suburb where all the houses had different styles but were worth practically the same. Manicured gardens, double garages, and quiet streets. Her father had been a civil engineer and her mother, a primary school teacher for 3 decades. Practical people with firm character. We arrived around 2 p.m. The driveway was full of cars. It was evident that the event was important to everyone. From the street, music and voices mixed could already be heard coming from the backyard. Evelyn, Bethany's mother, opened the door. She looked about 60, with the same direct gaze and frank attitude as her daughter. Her expression lit up when she saw me. "Adam, Bethany has told us so much about your conservation work. What a joy to finally meet you," she said, hugging me sincerely. And I deeply regret what happened with her. It was unforgivable. That honesty took me by surprise in a good way. Thank you, Evelyn. I appreciate you saying that. Come, join me. Everyone is in the backyard. I'll warn you now. About 40 people will ask you what you do. Say it only once. Someone will spread the word for you. We walked through the house, a warm and lived-in home, full of family photos that told the story of generations. When we stepped out into the backyard, I was impressed. They had a full outdoor kitchen, several seating areas, and enough space for children to play without bothering the adults. It was then that I saw her. Veronica was by the outdoor bar in a designer summer dress and enormous sunglasses. She was taking selfies as if she were at an exclusive event. When she turned and saw me enter with Bethany, her entire expression broke. Her rehearsed smile immediately evaporated, giving way to pure confusion, followed by fury, and then a panic so evident that anyone could notice it. She stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a drink, and her phone almost ended up on the ground. "What is he doing here?" she said so loudly that several conversations instantly stopped. Bethany remained calm, her tone so controlled it almost sounded therapeutic. "Adam is my guest," she replied. "We're dating." The silence that followed was so abrupt that I could hear the birds singing in the trees. It was as if everything had frozen in a single instant. "You're dating my ex-boyfriend?" Veronica exploded, raising her voice to a register that probably bothered the neighborhood dogs. Bethany didn't lose an ounce of serenity. "Are you referring to the man you humiliated in an expensive restaurant and then offered to be your friend with benefits?" "Yes. He's my boyfriend." Bethany's clinical tone was almost surgical. Veronica went from white to intense red in seconds. Her hands were shaking. I didn't know if it was from anger, surprise, or a mixture of everything. "This is betrayal," she spat. "You knew I was planning—" "Planning what?" Bethany interrupted her without raising her voice. "To get him back after treating him like he wasn't good enough for you?" "That wasn't a plan, Veronica. That was a fantasy." Several of Veronica's friends, the same ones who had been at that infamous dinner at the Meridian restaurant where everything began to unravel, were clustered near the garden table when the tension exploded. They looked like a compact formation, a small, watchful circle, as if by staying together they could control the situation. Among them, Skylar was the first to react. She took a clumsy step forward, like someone who knows they should intervene but wishes they didn't have to. Her gaze went from Veronica to Bethany and then to me, as if searching for the least painful way to mediate. "This is totally inappropriate, Bethany," she murmured, forcing a conciliatory tone that failed to hide her discomfort. "You know, there's a code between sisters for these kinds of things." She said it through clenched lips, aware that her words wouldn't hold up for long. And indeed, they didn't. Bethany's laugh was short, dry, and absolutely devoid of sympathy. It wasn't a hearty laugh. It was more a sign of disbelief, as if hearing that argument were an insult to the memory of everyone present. "A code between sisters?" she repeated calmly, without changing her tone. How curious to hear that from someone who sat there without saying a single word while Veronica publicly destroyed a person who had done absolutely nothing. "Tell me, Skylar, where was your famous friend code that night?" The comment landed with the weight of a truth no one wanted to admit. Skylar opened her mouth as if to respond but found nothing. Her face turned red. She looked down at her glass and held it in her hands as if seeking refuge in a harmless object. She had no defense, and she knew it. Veronica, seeing the atmosphere dangerously tipping against her, resorted to her oldest and most effective resource, tears. And they weren't uncontrolled tears, no. They were perfectly measured, placed at the exact moment, as if someone had activated an internal switch she knew perfectly well. She had practiced that reaction so many times it seemed automatic. "How could you do this to me after everything I've had to endure?" she whimpered, partially covering her face. Bethany took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "And what exactly have you had to endure?" she asked, without raising her voice. "Having broken up with someone just because he couldn't sustain the lifestyle you wanted to show off on social media? That's not trauma, Veronica. That's called consequence." The phrase hung in the air. From one of the kitchen windows, Evelyn had been watching the scene for a good while, frowning. When she considered she had seen enough, she walked out decisively. Her steps were firm, confident, the steps of someone accustomed to setting boundaries when no one else dares. "Enough, Veronica," she said, standing between us. "You were the one who ended that relationship in the cruelest way possible. You don't have the right to decide what happens next." Veronica began to crumble. "But he's my ex," she repeated desperately. "It's humiliating that my own sister—" "You humiliated yourself," chimed in David from his spot next to the grill. His voice was low, but everyone heard it. David was not a man who got involved in family arguments. He was more of a silent observer, someone who only spoke when his words had a clear purpose. That's why when he spoke, people listened. "You treated a good man as if he were a disposable accessory," he added, "just because his bank account didn't match the image you wanted to project. Don't expect compassion now that he decided to move on with his life." The reaction was instantaneous. Several nods, some uncomfortable glances, and many murmurs of approval were heard around. Even Veronica's teenage cousin, who had been recording party stories minutes before, dropped a direct comment. "If you yourself posted that you were over him and growing, why does it bother you so much what he does now?" Everyone remembered that post. A carefully produced photo, accompanied by paragraphs full of cliches about freeing oneself, moving forward, and prioritizing one's own happiness. Her followers had fallen for that narrative, but here, in front of her own family, no one was buying that sweetened version anymore. Veronica was on the verge of collapse. Perhaps she had arrived at the reunion expecting something else, that I would show up alone, perhaps embarrassed, looking to understand what had happened. Perhaps she expected that Bethany and I wouldn't come together, or that her family would console her for losing something valuable. Instead, she witnessed everyone aligning with the truth she had denied hearing for so long. Skylar, Chloe, and the small group of influencers orbiting Veronica tried to form a shield around her. They shot looks of contempt at Bethany and me, as if their disapproval could reverse the facts. Those expressions were their only possible defense, superficial indignation to justify the unjustifiable. What was fascinating was that outside of that tense core, the rest of the reunion continued with surprising normality. Evelyn brought me a full plate and introduced me to Bethany's grandparents. They wanted to know more about my conservation work. David, still listening from the grill, started asking me about wildlife management techniques in Colorado. And Bethany's uncle, a man who had worked for the National Park Service for over 20 years, held a long conversation with me about trail maintenance, forest fires, and insufficient budgets for educational programs. They were authentic, deep conversations with people interested in the content, not the appearance. Meanwhile, Veronica remained in a corner, surrounded by her friends, whose support was crumbling minute by minute. Their gestures of solidarity had become automatic, almost mechanical, and when Bethany and I passed nearby, Veronica would look away, pretending to check messages, stumbling through excuses. Almost 2 hours later, I saw her go out to her car. She adjusted her hair, increased the brightness on her phone, and started recording herself crying, carefully framing every angle, every shadow, every tear. It was her survival mechanism, turning her shame into content. She didn't know how to live her emotions without filtering them through a camera. Bethany and I stayed until the end of the party. We ate peacefully, talked with the family, and enjoyed the feeling of belonging to an environment that valued authenticity more than image. As we said goodbye, Evelyn called us over. "I'm glad you found each other," she said, placing a hand on both our shoulders. Veronica could have had something like this if she had valued what truly matters: but she chose something else. And you don't have to carry the weight of her decisions. On the drive back to my cabin, Bethany was quiet, but not disturbed, just reflecting. "It turned out better than I imagined," she finally said. "Your family has something special. Nothing to do with who believes someone's value depends on the money they earn." They had been wanting someone to set a limit on Veronica for years. They just needed someone to stop excusing her. In the following months, Bethany and I deepened our relationship. We didn't post photos or make announcements, no social media. We just lived our life in silence without the need to prove anything. On weekends, we hiked routes I used in my survival courses. She carried field guides, and I taught her to identify edible plants, track animals, and find water. We camped under open skies, cooked over campfires, and listened to owls and coyotes. It was a real connection. When there was no space for new animals at her hospital, she brought them to my property. We built rehabilitation enclosures, shared night shifts caring for fox kits, cleaning wounds, and feeding raptors. It was collaborative work, a genuine partnership. Meanwhile, Veronica's digital world began to crack. Her followers detected patterns. 4 serious relationships in 8 months, all with the same abrupt end after getting the perfect photos in luxury restaurants. Her texts full of phrases about energy, cycles, and growth started receiving uncomfortable comments. "Another rich boyfriend? This is getting old. I think the problem isn't them. Honestly, this is pathetic." Her engagement dropped drastically. Brands stopped messaging her. Aspirations don't work when real life contradicts the persona. She even tried contacting me using new accounts. I blocked them without reading them. She went to my workplace twice, once trying to intercept me in the parking lot, the other walking directly into the building. My supervisor, who knew the whole story, asked security to remove her both times. After the second incident, she was formally banned from the property. I moved on, and she, for the first time, had to face a reality without filters or audiences protecting her. Bethany and I had been together for about 10 months when we started talking seriously about our future. These were no longer light conversations about possible vacations, but real discussions about how to merge our professional goals. One night, while resting on my cabin porch after an exhausting day, watching fleeting meteor trails, she pitched an idea that hung in the air, too good to ignore. "What if we open our own center?" she proposed, gazing at the sky. "Combining wildlife rehabilitation with environmental education, a space where people could learn conservation while doing authentic fieldwork. A place accessible to schools, communities, and visitors who wanted to truly get involved." The idea struck me like a revelation. For months, we immersed ourselves in funding research, reviewing scholarship programs, and making exhaustive lists of materials, infrastructure, and permits needed. She provided valuable contacts thanks to her veterinary work. I attracted the interest of state parks through my years of teaching survival skills and outdoor education programs. Finally, we found a property of over 40 acres in the mountains. It had a perfect mix of forest and meadows, plus a natural stream and several old structures that could be utilized. The previous owner had used it as a private retreat, so there were solid foundations to build upon. The cost left our bank accounts empty, but the potential was too great to let pass. The construction and renovation took us 2 years of hard physical labor. To save money, we did almost everything ourselves. We cleared trails, built proper animal rehabilitation enclosures following state norms. We renovated old buildings and converted them into classrooms, labs, and medical rooms. Thanks to Bethany's credentials, collaborations with international conservation groups emerged. My experience attracted students, institutions, and educational program organizers from across the region. At 18 months, we already had 12 permanent employees. Courses were booked 3 months in advance. Specialized outdoor education magazines published articles about our project. For the first time in our careers, we felt our work had a tangible, measurable impact beyond well-intentioned speeches. When we decided to get married, there was only one possible place to hold the ceremony: our own educational center, surrounded by everything we had built with our hands. Bethany wanted every detail to express our convictions without falling into poses for social media. The food would be from local, sustainable farms, the decorations made with biodegradable materials, and the invitations requested donations to rehabilitation programs instead of traditional gifts. The planning process was surprisingly enjoyable, free of stress and superficial expectations. We were just two people celebrating their story with those who truly appreciated us. 3 days before the ceremony, while Bethany was finalizing catering details and I was setting up chairs in the outdoor amphitheater, a figure appeared walking from the property line. It took me a moment to recognize her. It was Veronica, an echo of my former life. Her image as a designer draped in luxury had completely disappeared. She wore cheap, ill-fitting clothes. Her hair was messy, unwashed, carelessly pulled back. It wasn't a natural style. It was exhaustion, much thinner, with dull skin, like someone who had been dealing with stress and poor nutrition for months. She stopped a few feet from me, trying to project confidence, although her eyes betrayed her. "Adam, I know this isn't the best time, but I have important information," she announced with perfectly rehearsed drama. "Something about Bethany you need to know before you ruin your life." I listened without moving. Her tone didn't generate anger, but a pity so profound it surprised me. "Veronica, you are trespassing on private property. You need to leave right now," I replied. She ignored the warning. "I'm trying to save you. Bethany is manipulating you. You're just her revenge against me. She saw your vulnerability and took advantage of it. All of this," she said, gesturing to our center, "is a stage to advance her career thanks to your work. I know about your financial issues before we broke up. This place is your way of proving you're not the mediocre guy I said you were. It's a revenge plot, Adam." Nothing more. I put down the chair I was adjusting and looked her straight in the eyes. "Do you really think that makes sense? Bethany has her own professional trajectory. I have mine. We built this together because we share real values." But Veronica raised her voice, losing what little composure she had left. "You're marrying her for her family contacts and her vet credentials. You're using her career to achieve something you could never do alone. Don't you see he's still the same? He just hides it better." At that moment, Bethany came out of the catering tent, accompanied by family members who had arrived early to help. Everyone clearly heard Veronica. Her accusations echoed through the trees. The subsequent silence was absolute. Bethany took a deep breath and spoke with the same calm she uses when explaining a medical procedure to an anxious owner. "Veronica, unlike you, I know Adam for real. I don't need an edited version for social media. I accept him with everything he is, the good, the difficult, and what's still a work in progress. That is a real relationship, not a stage for appearances." Evelyn, who was setting up tables, stepped forward. Her expression showed years of accumulated weariness from enduring similar dramas. "Enough, Veronica. You lost the right to an opinion when you publicly humiliated Adam. He and Bethany built something authentic, while you continue to blame everyone but yourself for the consequences of your decisions." But Veronica didn't know how to stop. He's using Bethany's career to achieve something he could never accomplish alone. "Don't you see he's still the same?" Then, Bethany's teenage cousin, a 17-year-old already fed up with the spectacle, cut through the tension with a clarity that left everyone stunned. "If he's so terrible, why are you here trying to ruin his wedding? That sounds like you still want him." The accuracy was so brutal that Veronica froze, unable to articulate a single word. In a matter of seconds, any semblance of credibility collapsed. Bethany called the center's security staff. Within minutes, 2 employees arrived and escorted Veronica toward her car, while she babbled increasingly incoherent accusations. Her retreat had an unexpectedly purifying effect, as if the last shadow of the past had been expelled right before our big day. "Well," Bethany commented serenely as we watched the car drive away, "I guess there are no more ghosts haunting our celebration." The rest proceeded in absolute peace. Veronica disappeared completely after that incident, but her appearance served as a reminder of what I would never again allow: for someone to confuse my convictions with weakness, or my priorities with a lack of ambition. Bethany wrapped her arms around me from behind, as we watched the bats slice through the sky, hunting insects over the water. That moment encapsulated everything we had achieved. 3 years later, our educational center appeared in a major documentary about conservation. Bethany received regional recognition for her innovative work in wildlife rehabilitation. My survival programs were adopted by state parks and schools in several western states. We expanded the facilities, hired 8 more people, and began training new instructors to replicate our model in other regions. The dream we built with empty hands became a benchmark.